Well, hello there. Welcome to the PJ Campbell Show. My name, of course, is Patrick Campbell, or as I am known as PJ Campbell online and in the film community. I'm really excited that you guys are here today. This new podcast that I'm working on with Patrick Hogue, the PJ Campbell Show, is going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be covering a lot of movie news, movie reviews, life, just conversations with us, and a very cool panel of people that we're looking forward to having on because we got a lot of cool guest stars and things coming up that we're very excited about. But what you guys might notice is this is actually going to be living on an old RSS feed for my old podcast, Real Film Chatter. If you go back onto this RSS feed, you're going to see a lot of really great episodes discussing some of the older movie news, some movie reviews, some kind of throwbacks where I actually deep dived into older movies with some of my old co-hosts, and it was a lot of fun. So I really wanted to kind of go back to that audience and also bring a new audience on. So I'm really glad that you guys are here. So go back into the RSS feed, take a look at some of the old episodes. I'd really love to hear what you guys have to think about some of that. There's some really good stuff on there. Also, just keep an eye on the on this whole RSS feed altogether because we actually are working on some other stuff as well that we're going to be very excited to share with you guys in due time. But for now, the PJ Campbell Show will be the new anchor to the old Real Film Chatter feed, and I'm very happy to have you guys here for a brand new audience as well as some returning audience. So thank you guys so much for your continued support over the last few years. Please head over to podbean.com, find the PJ Campbell Show, and subscribe. You'll also be able to subscribe on Apple iTunes. So thank you guys again for all of your support. I hope you really enjoy the first episode of the PJ Campbell Show. It is our first pilot episode. We're definitely kind of getting our feet wet again and really jumping into this, but I think it's a lot of fun. And really, again, thank you guys so much for the support. It means the world to myself and to Patrick as well. So thank you so much and enjoy.
Grid is live. Initiate.
Excellent!
I'm not interrupting anything, am I?
Bogus.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
My name's Norman Bates.
Oh, man, I'm so excited. I'm in, Mom.
Merry Christmas, movie house! We came, we saw, we kicked his ass.
I'm just not the hero type, clearly.
Everything's under control. Situation normal.
Oh, well. Let me go in and say hi.
Hail to the king, baby.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the PJ Campbell Show. I am your host, Patrick PJ Campbell. If you are not familiar with who I am, I have been in the blogging and podcasting space for about 6 years. I've been covering movie news and writing reviews for a long time, and I did podcasts for a long time. Did a show called Real Film Chatter. We basically covered movie news, did reviews, retrospectives, things like that. It was a really great podcast. I had a really great time doing it, but I also realized that I wasn't enjoying as much always talking about the movie news and things like that. I wanted to do more. So after a lot of thought and a lot of other things going on in my personal life, I decided that it was time to come back to podcasting, but I was going to do it my own way. And as someone who loves late night talk shows and things like that, that was the aim. So what we're going to be doing is having interviews and just talking about news and the things happening in the world, and we're going to have fun. That's the key word. I want to have fun. I know fun is a trigger word for people because apparently fun is bad when it comes to DC movies and things like that, and now I've lost half the audience right out the gate, and that's okay. But the thing I'm really excited about is I'm not here alone. I'm actually going to be joined by my co-host, Patrick Hogue. He's a really great friend that has also become someone that I just really love talking with. And part of this kind of came from the fact that we figured that as we were talking, we should probably just be recording the conversations we were having. And so I actually exported him from Canada. And I thought that was really cool. I didn't realize how much shipping from Canada cost when you were, but you know,
Especially when it weighs like 300 pounds.
yeah, exactly. So, you know, here we are. And, you know, Patrick, thank you so much for doing this. Like, I'm so excited for us to be talking about movies
And Patrick.
and life. Yeah, this isn't going to get confusing at all.
This is not to make it any more complicated than it needs to be for us both being named Patrick. I think we'll refer to us through our code names, you being Big Bear, me being Mama Bear, to make it easier and simpler.
Or the Hungry Bears.
Or the Hungry Bears.
This
Both
sounds
called the
really
Hungry Bears.
bad. Very, very quickly, this is going south, and I love it.
It already went south when you said fun. I felt triggered like immediately.
Because you like DC movies and don't want to have fun.
I just hate fun in general.
That's fair, and that's kind of what we're going for, is hating fun in general, I guess. No, I really just wanted to have a show where we could talk about everything that was going on, not just movies. There's a lot happening in the world as it is. I think that most people kind of see that all the time, unfortunately, and I wanted to find a place where we could talk about everything.
Well, and I think, what you said in terms of, like, you wish we were just recording as we were just kind of chatting before recording this. I agree in terms of, I don't know, there's just something very cathartic about doing this, about talking about a passion that we love, and this is really nice. Like, this is my first time doing anything kind of podcasting or anything like this, so to be able to, have these, like, empathetic conversations about, film and this thing that we love is really cathartic and really awesome, and I'm excited to go on this journey with you.
Yeah, and I hope that you guys are going to be along for the ride. We have a lot of stuff that we want to talk about today. Not so much hot topic issues, I'm hoping. There was some stuff that happened as we were recording that was happening with Kevin Hart and the Oscars, and to be honest, I didn't feel like touching that. There's just too much around it at the moment.
It's also very early in its development, so the dust hasn't settled.
So we decided that we were going to talk about movies, because apparently that's what we wanted to do. But the one thing for sure that we really want to talk about today is Creed 2. There's some movie news that we are going to cover as well. And on top of that, I think that I have some questions I would like to talk to you about, because you are actually working on a new short film called So, that I am very, very excited about, because like yourself, I love horror films, and I love that you were wanting to direct a horror short. So I would really like to talk about that with you.
Well, I'm completely unprepared. I thought we were talking about Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. So I am completely...
We are actually not doing book club this week.
Shoot. Okay. So we'll transition to the short film I'm working on. So yeah.
We will. We'll get there. No. But I do want to talk about some of the other stuff first.
Yeah, no, of course.
So let's actually talk a little bit about Creed 2. You finally got to catch it this week. And
yes.
Let me ask you first, with Creed, where do you come from with this franchise? Is this a franchise that's been in your life for a long time, or is it something you didn't discover until later in life that you've now discovered and really enjoy? And where did that come from?
Well, as you have learned, as our friendship has grown over the last year, I am not the best film fan in the world. In terms
you don't say.
Yeah, in terms of the amount of times you have been disappointed by the movies I haven't seen.
Staggering.
Yes.
Staggering.
Depth-defying, or whatever that term is. The only Rocky film I saw before Creed was Rocky Balboa.
Okay.
And I was still in like high school. Like, I really didn't have too many formative memories of movies. Like, I had my childhood nostalgia. I had the movies like of Willy Wonka was one of my favorite movies, and so Back to the Future was one of my favorite movies, and all these movies that I built up in my head. Jurassic Park, obviously. But, like, as I, got through high school and as I got through, early college and everything, there were these movies that I started paying attention to because, film in general was just kind of a tangential part of my life. But Rocky Balboa always stood out to me as, like, something that seemed, I don't know, that movie really captured a sense of reverence. Like, because obviously it is a movie that is very reverent towards, like, the franchise it is. And I was like, oh, man. Rocky always seems like that tangential thing that I could get into if I like really took the time and if I really like wanted to get invested. I'm a big sap at heart, and like
you're like me. I love Frank Capra. I think that's a big reason I've always liked Frank Capra.
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah.
I mean, it happened one night. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. The movies he made were very much kind of that sentimental, tug at the heartstrings type movie. It's actually where Spielberg finds himself right now. I think his late stage career is very interesting because it's very much that sentimental side. It's a very different take.
Well,
for him.
it's Spielberg who basically is a filmmaker who's learned to weaponize, sentimentality, and is like, he's just so perfect at knowing how to like push those specific buttons to make you nostalgic, but like when he wants to make you feel reverent, when he wants you to make you feel like a child again. Spielberg is like the master at kind of that distilled feeling of, specialness, whatever that means. But going into Creed, always had, Creed was kind of a movie that was made for me. Someone who was always tangentially like interested in what Rocky was, but was never gung ho of like I've seen all the films and like, I know all the characters. I know who Paulie is. I know who Mickey is. I know who Adrian is. I've always tangentially heard their names. But, I saw Fruitvale Station, which, again, as somebody who's not great at keeping up with movies, I saw Fruitvale Station by Ryan Coogler and loved it. Cried 2 times in the movie and just kind of knew from the pedigree that there was something special about Creed going into it. And so pretty amped hearing about it, loved the trailer going into it, and was just kind of floored. It was one of those experiences of like, oh, I wish I kind of was invested in the Rocky franchise because I feel like I would have gotten even more out of it. But Creed is one of those special movies that I feel I'm jealous of like the script of what the film is, because the kind of meta narrative of what the film is about, like this it is the sequel to a franchise that is trying to spin off and be its own thing while still living on the shoulders of like the Rocky franchise that it's building upon. And that's what Adonis Creed in the film is trying to do, like live off the legacy of what Rocky is, live off the legacy of what like Apollo Creed is, and it's
yet having his own life.
Yeah, and it's very reflective of what Stallone's career is, as like all of the Rocky films are, like the humble beginning to like the huge like upswing to Rocky 4 to kind of the crash and burn of like 5 to like kind of
the redemption of 6.
Redemption of 6, and now like 7 is Creed is like the prop up of like there's still something special here, and especially with Stallone's performance as Rocky in Creed, which literally got him nominated for an Oscar
that he should have won. I haven't
seen Bridge of Spies.
I love Bridge of Spies.
Mm-hmm.
I do. I'm one of the people who actually really, really likes Bridge of Spies a lot. I think it's got a great script. I think the performances are great. Mm-hmm. It's not Spielberg's best, but it's a movie that I very, very much enjoy. But Mark Rylance is good. Mm-hmm. Stallone was so much more, I feel like, because it's a character that had a big history at that point, and he played it to such a point that it was so heartbreaking and so beautiful and so moving. And I felt this way watching Creed 2 as well, is that he just continues to slip into this character just so powerfully. It's so cool. I love that, and it makes me excited by the fact that we've gotten to watch this character transform for so long. I mean, it is a 40-year franchise at this point, and
and you very rarely see characters age.
Right.
Like, you see like now with like cinematic universes, like I think audiences are a lot more like adept to that, but like with Stallone, like and especially with Creed, you see like a Rocky who's been informed by the movies before him and is like still evolving in the movies that are to come.
It's the interesting thing about the fact that Star Wars has come back too, is because we're seeing the catch up of characters like Han 30 years later compared to where we had seen them last in Return of the Jedi. But I think for Rocky it's so much more, because like you were talking about earlier, it's very much Stallone kind of living his career through the character, and every movie feels very much like he's writing himself at where he is in his life.
It seems like Rocky is very in tune with who Stallone is as a person.
Right.
Like a bit more extreme, but still like kind of in the vein of like if there was any character that Stallone played that would be representative of him, it would probably be Rocky.
Yeah, and I came from a place where the movies have always kind of been there in my life, but it wasn't until high school that I really started to appreciate just how much they moved me. And there's definitely a part of that, I think, that comes from the fact that after a little while, they became movies that my dad and I started to enjoy a lot together, which was kind of cool, because the one thing that he and I have always shared more than anything was just enjoying movies together and enjoying television together. And, like any father and son, we've had very rocky relationships, and yet I see a lot of myself in what Rocky sees his relationship with his son.
Yeah.
I see myself as his son.
Yeah.
I see myself as Robert a lot of the time in the stuff that's happened between my dad and I, and kind of that distant feeling and things like that. So I have
there's a personal connection.
Yeah, there's a real personal connection. So I think the thing with Creed 2, because we're going to really just kind of
get into the
movie, is that for me, more than anything, I mean, this is very much Adonis's film, and it's very, as it very much should be. But not only that, it's also a sequel to Rocky 4, and it's also a sequel to Creed, while also trying to finish the Rocky storyline in what feels like a very proper way.
It has a lot of tough jobs for it to do.
It has a lot of heavy lifting to do. And yet the thing that stands out to me the most, because of where I am in my life right now and the stuff that I've had that's been going on, I definitely have that Rocky storyline as maybe my favorite storyline in the entire movie, next to the stuff going on with Drago.
Yeah.
Because I feel a very personal connection to the fact that Rocky really wants this redemptive story with his son, because you think that by the time Balboa is over, that they've finally kind of buried the past and things could get better.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that makes this ring so true is the fact that even if they were able to bury what had been their like broken relationship at that point, he's still Rocky, and you can never get out of that shadow. And so having Robert move away and like get married, and Rocky isn't really there because he doesn't feel like he can reach out to him because he's already hurt him so much, is such a very interesting idea.
Well, and I think that's kind of the brilliant things about the Creed movies. And like the thing that impresses me the most about Creed 2 is how kind of like how easy it seems for it to like do all of what it does to humanize the Dragos, to like kind of resolve like Rocky's like issues with his son, whereas that could have gone wrong
Easily.
so
easily.
It's like in you know, like I not watching Rocky 4, but seeing a lot of it, like knowing kind of what the tone is, knowing what like, you know, kind of how much of a cartoon it is a little bit of the time, of like Ivan Drago is not a real person.
Yeah,
and
they ground it.
And in Creed 2, it really takes the time to be like, no, psychologically, what would happen to this guy if his country kind of excommunicated him? If he
and
was,
not just that, what would happen if his wife turned on him?
If his wife turned on him, if he had a directive past just like beating Rocky and lost, it's like, all right, if he has children, it's getting directed to them. That rage that's infueled inside of him goes to Victor Drago, and you see kind of like, you know, the sins of the father like storyline play out as it like goes throughout the film. And I think, you know, and I think
the whole movie is sins of the father when you really think about it, because it's the sins of Drago losing. It's the sins of the fact that Creed even ever took the match to begin with. It was his hubris that made him take it. He felt like he had something to prove, and he decided he had to do it. It's Adonis, and deciding the sins of the father is that he has to fix what happened.
Well,
it's Rocky.
And that's the thing. I love how that like, you're talking about kind of like the three trifecta of like Adonis, you know, let's say the Dragos are kind of like one of the three,
Sure.
and like Stallone or Rocky, is that they all are dealing with father issues, but they're not exactly the same. They're all kind of like countering to each other. They all contrast each other. Like Rocky is dealing with very different father issues than what like Adonis is. Like Adonis is more dealing with the idea of legacy and living up to that. Same with Ivan and Victor, but like it's a different kind of legacy, and it's a different kind of way to like portray that. Whereas Stallone, it's an idea of legacy ruining what his family was, but it's also like kind of doing retribution for that. And it's just the way that like it kind of builds off what the first one does in terms of like, you know, Adonis in the first one is very much being like, I want to use the legacy of my father not as a crutch, but as a symbol for me to aspire to.
Sure.
And in the second one, it's the same thing, but kind of for Victor going for Ivan. And it's kind of for Rocky, it's the reverse of like, I used that icon, kind of ruined my relationship with you. Let me go back on that. And it's all these like different complex things about like son, you know, fatherhood with their sons and sons with their fathers, that I think is just so impressive, like how many aspects they're able to deal with, all the characters, that I you know, like if
It's
this
a
was the
crazy
last,
balancing act.
Yeah, if this was the last Creed movie, I would feel completely fulfilled with like where everybody is left in this film.
And I've been saying that since the night that it came out, because when I went and I left, and I was really, really excited about it, and Josh and I had been talking about it, and I really felt this sense of closure that even as much as I love Balboa, and Balboa definitely gives the most closure on that character to that point.
Yeah.
This finally felt like real closure, if that makes sense. And it's not just for him, though. It's the closure for Adonis, because you definitely feel like he finally puts the stuff with his father behind him, which I think is really important.
Well, and it's funny because Stallone wrote this movie, whereas
Which he didn't with the first one.
Well, and Ryan, he's written every Rocky film except Creed, which was Ryan Coogler coming to him being like, hey, I think there's a story past You know?
Right.
And I think the last shot of the first Creed is literally perfect of like, you know, it's kind of out of focus in the background of what Philadelphia, and then Creed and Stallone, and Creed puts his hand on Rocky's shoulder. Beautiful. But watching Creed 2, there was a moment when, you know, getting into spoiler territory at this point, maybe not too spoilery, but like at the end, there's a shot of Rocky during a boxing match that is behind him, of him putting on his hat. That is so perfect in iconography, like so iconic of like what it is.
You're talking about the final shot of him at the ring.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think
love that shot.
and it's like it's after what happens just before of him like fist bumping Adonis. I was like, if it ends right there, perfect. Please don't ruin this, you know, like by doing something extra after that. The only thing that could have like been better than that last shot is him resolving his relationship with his son, and that's what they do. And it's like that moment, and I don't think Stallone gets enough credit for like, you can hear it in his voice and you can see it on his face, like him hugging his son. His voice kind of breaks a little bit, and he has this moment of just kind of like personal like resolution that you just see all work in one moment. That it's just powerful, and it just made me like tear up at that moment, along with Adonis talking to his father's grave. It's so perfect.
And that's even with the Dragos together, and you actually see Ivan now running alongside his son, and like what that means for them, finally of putting everything behind them. But I want to talk about that ending real quick with Rocky and finally getting that closure with Robert. What is so interesting is, for anyone who's seen Rocky Balboa, obviously they know his son is played by a relatively popular actor at this point because of This Is Us, which is Milo.
I'm sorry.
Have you not watched his last name?
Ventimiglia? Have you not seen Heroes?
And that's
Seasons
exactly
1
it.
through 5.
Well, actually 1 through 4. He was not in season 5.
Oh shucks.
Because
I
Heroes Reborn is not.
I
good.
stopped halfway through 4 because it got so bad.
Heroes Reborn, I was very, very excited for, and Heroes Reborn went off a rail very early on that knocked me off.
I was half excited, and I was like, my mom was like, "Oh yeah, I'll start watching that." And I was like, "Cool, tell me how it is." She does not have the highest bar for quality when it comes to television, and she was like, "It's not good." And I'm like, "Great,
yeah,
I don't have to waste."
I got 5 episodes in, and something happened in the show. It's been so long now at this point, but I finally felt like, no, I got off this bandwagon the first time for a reason.
Yeah.
And I realized there was a reason I had quit watching the show. And that's it's a bummer. I really, really like Heroes.
Heroes
season 1 is still amazing.
Beautiful. I even like parts of season 2.
I'd go as far as parts of season 3. There's parts. I mean, I'm not gonna argue that season 3 is good, but I'm gonna argue that there's definitely parts.
Yeah.
But it's so frustrating because this is what this show can be. Is the tangent is that Heroes was a show that had great actors and great storylines, and the writer's strike.
J.J. Abrams, Greg Grunberg, I should say.
It was the writer's strike, though, more than anything that killed that show. Because remember, season 1 started right as the writer's strike was happening, and that's what derailed season 2.
Yeah.
And so when it came back and they finally were trying to get back on track, essentially, it just never recovered from that. And there was a lot of stuff that was hindered by that. I mean, X-Men Origins Wolverine, Star Trek, the first Star Trek reboot, G.I. Joe, Retaliation, Rise of Cobra, the first movie. Like, all those movies, all those shows and things like that were all kind of affected by the writer's strike at that time.
Well, and it's funny because you see, like, the disparity of, like, all that content was, like, affected by it in negative ways, but something like Skyfall was like put off so far because of
Quantum was the one that came out right in the middle of the writer's strike too, and that was the one where Craig was literally coming up with action scenes that they could film while they were making the movie.
What if he just drinks oil? I really think, that'll be like a great resolution to the film.
That Quantum of Solace actually gets a fairly bad rap. Only because as an extension of Casino Royale, it works really, really well.
Yeah.
As we've like tangented so far off of what
were we
talking
about? Was it Rocky and Bullwinkle?
Rocky and Bullwinkle,
right.
Yes, and Boris and Natasha, Moose and Squirrel.
Yes.
So going back onto what we were talking about, it was
the sun.
It was pretty cool that they managed to get Milo to come back even for that small scene, and I feel like that came from the fact that Stallone was on This Is Us, and He had
Was he really?
He
I
did
haven't
like
seen
a
it.
guest in. I've never watched it, but I know that I think it was the season 2 premiere or something. One of the
Take
characters.
that, the Goldbergs. Think you can get all the hot cameos with Freddy Krueger and
Hey man,
Darth
that episode
Helmet?
of the Goldbergs is gold.
Beautiful.
It's
But
so
you
good.
don't got Stallone. That's all I'm
But
saying.
I have to give them credit for the fact that they found a way to kind of tie all that up, and to bring him back really ties in nicely to what Balboa is.
And I wouldn't want it more than that. It feels
Right.
so fitting to what Creed is, which is just like, we're going to touch on what we think is necessary for the drama. And it's like, if that's just one scene with, Rocky resolving with the son, all it needs to be is one short scene. It doesn't need to be like this whole through line. And it's like, yeah, there's a couple moments where he's like, I want to call my son, but it's not touched on too much. But it's just the perfect just amount of, especially if you want to make it the grounded version of what Rocky's been, don't overuse it. Milo, come in for a day. We'll have some good crafty. We'll bring you in and be like, a nice emotional scene. Perfect.
And it is totally perfect. And that's the thing with this movie, is I think that there's a lot of moments that are really, really great. Stephen Cable Jr. does very, very well for himself.
Yes.
He comes in.
Not
he
an
has,
easy job.
No, big shoes to fill, especially when you're like, oh, Ryan Coogler just made one of the most successful superhero films of all time after rebooting a franchise that really had no reason to be rebooted at the time. Everyone kind of wrote it off. I mean, really, legitimately. It was right around the same time that everyone was doing kind of these years later sequels. We'd already kind of put Rocky to rest with Rocky Balboa.
It was
Why would you
literally
even do it?
the same year as Force Awakens, which is the 7th film in a franchise, coming years off of the last one, and is going to be bringing back characters while still trying to introduce new ones. And it's like,
It's funny how much the trajectory of those two are so similar.
yeah. Well, and it's and like I really like Force Awakens, but talking in terms, like if we're going to talk about Ghostbusters, if we're going to talk about,
Any of those.
any of the like kind
Jurassic World.
Jurassic World, I think there's just something about Creed, especially with Ryan Coogler talking about like connections with his own father. There's just such a reverence for the material, along with making sure that it's not obsessive over it. Like making sure it's a good movie. Like there's a story there before it is, oh man, the park is open again and the dinosaurs are loose because we knew you liked that about the first Jurassic Park. It's like, no, what would happen if the son of Apollo Creed
And not
was
just
real?
the son of, but a bastard child of him.
Yeah.
If we're really talking about it, that's what it was. He was the bastard child of Apollo Creed, and that's a fairly large deal. Because remember when that was the announcement of that movie, a lot of people were like, wait, you mean Apollo like cheated on his wife and all this stuff, and that really undoes a lot of what we liked about the character. And there was a lot of hesitation about the idea of even doing it. That was part of the reason Stallone really didn't want to do it, because he had already turned him down once. And then he finally saw Fruitvale Station and went, you know what, maybe this guy has a vision after all.
If somebody came to me and was like, hey, I want to continue your franchise that you put a pretty nice button on, you made a pretty great emotional like kind of
Finale
encapsulation of like what this franchise is, I want to keep going with it. And I would completely understand Stallone's point of view of like, no, get out of here, kid. Like, what have you done? And it's like, oh wait, you made Fruitvale Station. That was a pretty good movie. All right, get in here. And that's the thing is, talking about kind of the bastardization. Actually, wrong term. But Adonis being the bastard son of Creed, of Apollo Creed. That was the thing that I feel like I had a kind of an issue with, like initially when I saw the first Creed, that I've grown to appreciate a lot more, is that when I first saw Creed and when I first was trying to like figure out really who is Adonis as a character, like, because he seemed not wishy-washy, but he seemed very unsure in the first film. And watching it a lot more again, like there's that moment at the end when he's in the final fight and, Stallone and like Rocky's like, what do you got to prove? And like he says, I got to prove I'm not a mistake. And it's
Yeah.
like, and like there's just that sense of like, you feel like at that moment he's been unsure throughout the whole movie of why he wants to be a fighter, why he's doing what he's doing. And in that moment, I feel like it all locks in, both for the character and both for kind of like the emotional journey he's going through of like, no, I'm here because of my own worth. I'm here because, like of who I am and what I do and what I love. And like, I don't know. There's something about that emotional journey that, like, on, retrospection, like, I appreciate way much more now than I did when I initially saw it. And, like, I don't think that film could work without, like, those elements of kind of, the seediness of how Adonis came to be in the world, being an illegitimate child. And
Well, and not just that. I mean, and they even kind of touch on it in the first Creed, obviously, with that ESPN segment where they're talking about it, and one of the guys goes, well, I think it's an embarrassment for the family. Like, they've been trying to hide it for so long.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how well that kind of plays into everything. And I think that that's why these movies are so successful in the end, is because they've really played on what should not work, really, storyline-wise. This should never have been the storyline that we expected this series to go, and yet it dared to, and it ended up being really, really good in the process.
Well, and I think with, the first Creed is that it gets a lot of flack for just being like, oh, it's just an updated Rocky. It's like, no, Rocky wasn't like, a notorious, like, person that had their name in the public that was talked on ESPN. Like, obviously it's not in modern day, and so it wouldn't have the same, like, kind of in the film context, the social media, like, kind of exposure that Rocky would. But it's like, no, it's Rocky in the sense of just someone proving to themselves that they are worthy of what they believe they're worthy of. But the aspects of kind of like the culture, like, which I think is so, like, reflected in the score of, like, the updated of, having a rap, like, inspired kind of like training montage theme, like, us, two white guys talking about, like, a black director in terms of a black character, and, like, really infusing, like, a lot of that culture into, Adonis, and making sure it has that kind of infused sense of, like, personality, that infused sense of that culture. I think saying it's just kind of an updated remake of Rocky is so just kind of limiting in, like, what it is.
I agree. I think that that's a thing that I've pushed back on a lot as people have talked about it, is I really don't see it as that. I've seen it as so much more since the beginning, because is it stylistically obviously close to Rocky? Yeah, it's a boxing movie that happens to take place in Philadelphia.
The structure
you're always going to have
much
that
with.
structure,
Yeah.
I feel like, but it was more than that. The journey that Adonis is going on is so different than the journey that Rocky is going on.
Yeah.
I mean, they're totally different in every single way. And that's what makes these movies actually worth watching, is because it's a very different character. It's a very different world for him. Rocky was kind of like, he was always the optimistic, nice guy, but he was also living in a world that was very kind of seedy. And remember, he was beating people up at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, he was basically working for mob bosses and beating people, but letting them go because he didn't want to hurt anyone. I mean, he comes from a very different place where Adonis wanted to hurt people.
Yeah.
He was angry. He felt like he'd been abandoned. There was so much more to the two sides of this coin, and they're very different.
Well, and do you know what I think is, like, kind of one of the greatest aspects of the Creed franchise is that it's so aware of its own history, like, going from Rocky through Creed. And it's like, even just in the trailer to Creed 2, with, like, Rocky being like, that guy, he broke stuff in me that still hasn't been fixed. And it's like, there's a whole storyline dedicated to, their child having the same hearing loss that Bianca has. And it's like, that is such, like, it doesn't have the hugest impact on the story, but it's such a fine detail that informs the characters. And, like, even in the first film, when you have, like, Adonis's mother being like, I had to carry your father up these stairs.
Do you know how many times I had to wipe his ass because he couldn't?
It's just like, it just fills in, like, your idea of the films of, like, no, these characters have been through it. These characters really have, like, lived this life.
There's a very living history, which is what I wanted to ask you real quick, because you mentioned towards the beginning that you actually hadn't seen Rocky IV leading into Creed 2.
Yes.
So I mean, obviously, I love Rocky IV. I've lived Rocky IV for a very long time.
And I knew of its culture.
Sure.
Yeah, and whatnot.
But I have to ask, as someone who has never seen Rocky IV, does Creed 2 emotionally impact you in the way that you would expect? Does it? Because we are talking about the fact that this world feels so lived in, and I feel like there's so much about Creed 2 that plays off of what you know about Rocky 4 at the same time, because again, the impossible task of being a sequel to Creed while also being a sequel to a 30-year-old film is very, very difficult. But does it work for you in every, like, does every beat land?
Yes, for the most part. There is one beat that we could talk about that you actually brought up earlier that I kind of disagree with slightly. That I'll bring up a little later. I think Creed 2 has a harder job than what Creed 1 does. I think Creed, again, the script to Creed is phenomenal and beautiful in pretty much every way, and I think kind of, again, I'm very jealous of like, I don't know how intentional it is, but how much it reflects reality and what the film is in conjunction with like who Adonis is compared to his father and like the film compared to the franchise it's in. But with Creed 2, it has to be not only a sequel to that, it has to be a sequel to one of the most like kind of, you know, over the top, cartoonish, you know, films in terms of like a grounded series that has ever been made. And I think for me, like I went in with that knowledge, knowing what Rocky IV was, knowing kind of like what the history there was, knowing it's like, all right, even if I hadn't seen that film, I knew that this film is going to have a tough time having to overcome kind of like the over the topness of like what Rocky IV was. And again, going in, the beats, I'm shocked with how well they land. I knew, and I watched an interview with the director, Stephen Campbell Jr., where he was talking about, like, kind of a little bit of inspiration with the Dragos was The Dark Knight, of, like, the cold open with the Joker. And it's like, when the first scene that comes up, I'm going in a little tentative to the movie. The first scene is in the Ukraine with, you know, Ivan Drago waking up Victor. He's eating breakfast, and Ivan Drago goes out to the porch and just like looks out and just has a look on his face of like something's coming, and it just
like a deep dark determination almost.
And then you know it goes into a fight with Victor, and it set a mood for me of like, because the idea of what a Creed 2 could be, which everyone's like, oh, it needs to be the Dragos versus Adonis. I'm like, okay, as long as they treat it with, you know,
respect and making it serious.
And in terms of like, let's not get into Rocky IV territory. And that first scene, I think, does the beautiful move of like, all right, these guys just aren't going to be the generic Rocky IV like Russian bot villains. They are like, these are people with a history. We're going to get into it.
It's really interesting that you put it that way too, because I very much see it very similar, where my one worry that if we were going back to this well was the idea of what Rocky IV is versus what Creed had become.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how you managed to make a sequel, especially without Ryan Coogler at the helm. And I thought that Capel Jr. did a really nice job actually bringing these characters back, but grounding it in a way that it actually made sense. And I think that that's why the Dragos ended up being so interesting in the film, was because it was treated with such respect and it was so serious in the way that they did it, where you can tell that it is eaten away at Ivan since the day he lost the match and what that meant to him. And there's that whole thing about the fact that Victor was raised in hate and what that does to someone. And really, when you realize at the same time, a lot of where Victor's problems come from is the fact that he was abandoned by his mother and then left with his father, who was abandoned by his mother, and he was already abandoned by his country on top of it.
Yeah.
And what does that do to someone? What does that make someone?
Well, and it's that, and honestly, you know, like the concern that Ryan Coogler wasn't going to come back to direct was a big concern. My main concern was that he wasn't going to come back to write, and that Stallone was going to be the one to write it. And there's a dual credit between him and Jewel Taylor, who's worked on Marvelous Miss Maisel, which is a phenomenal show. Just a little shout out. But I was very concerned is that are we going to get too drastic of a tonal shift back, because you know he wrote much all the Rocky movies, and
I saw that too. I had the same worry.
But but that first scene put me at ease in terms of like, oh, Stallone is coming at this with kind of the modern perspective of like, he's not just going to the generic, these are the Russian guys like that they were in 4 of like, no, we're gonna have kind of symbols rather than characters. He was like, it very much put me at ease in terms of, no, these guys are characters. Let's talk about what Creed did so well, which is the history behind what these guys went through. Let's have that scene between Stallone and Dolph Lundgren when they're at the his restaurant. What's it called?
Adrian's.
Adrian's. That would make a lot of sense.
And how good is Dolph Lundgren in this, by the way?
He is great. I will also, I don't know the actor's name, but the person who plays Victor,
He's ridiculously good.
He's so, and like, I was a little afraid, like in the first couple scenes, he was very much like the rage cipher of like, he's just somebody who's got to have a good face and an intimidating presence, and my God, is he big and muscular and intimidating. But he has that one scene at the Russian dinner, like, where he gets up and he storms off and he starts yelling at Ivan, and I'm like, oh, wait, this kid's got some...
he's got range.
He's got some range, like a little bit. And
It's
even
not
Dolph,
a ton, but there's definitely
it's
range.
enough.
It's enough.
And it's like, it's not a ton, but it's enough to be like, I'm conflicted slightly in this last fight of like, this kid, I feel kind of sorry for him of what he's been through.
And I have to go on real quick because you brought up the last fight.
Yeah.
And this is a thing that I really did want to talk about a little bit,
So
is
good.
that, one, this fight is one of the best in the franchise, easily. This is 8 films. There's a lot of boxing matches in these movies at this point.
After these films, I've gone back and pretty much watched all the Rocky fights. So I have like the context of like what those were, and these are beautiful.
But the one thing I'll say too is, again, we've talked about this is the 8th film in a franchise at this point. And the thing about the 8th film in a franchise is there's only so many new things that you can actually do.
Yeah.
And the one thing that they do so well, I think, when you finally get to the end of all of this, is that the fight gets to a point where, as everyone's watching it play out, they realize that one of these guys is going to kill the other. And it's not, it's just that both of them are determined to like fix history.
Yeah.
And it gets to this point where in that moment, Ivan realizes that he doesn't want his son to kill Adonis. Because if he kills Adonis, he will go down a path that would be too similar to what he did.
Well, it's that, and it's also just like...
But you don't want your son to be that.
Exactly, and it's you see them throughout the entire film trying to win the affection of Ivan's wife, his mother, and just that moment when she leaves, like Dolph Lundgren has a moment where he like kind of like realizes,
was this worth it?
It's just kind of, what have I done, and how sad I am, and what I have put my son through, and kind of looking at him and looking at Victor in terms of, what am I raising him to be past this? Like, even if he wins the fight, where does this go past this? And there's like just this perfect kind of character moment in terms of sins of the father, of I screwed up, and I think it works in dual part because Victor did such a good job of showing that I don't even necessarily like doing this. This is just all I know.
Right.
Again, I'm a kid, raised in hate, and it's that aspect. But I think going into that final fight, I think there's a trifecta that got me pumped going into it. One, you had the fight between him and Creed before then, where you saw the visceral brutality of like what this guy can do. And so that every, like, especially the first punch that Victor does to Creed affects him in a way. Like, you see, Adonis have a moment of, I was not expecting that kind of level. So that's going to be that kind of stakes. And then on top of all the emotion, what's going into it, that the Rocky films do so well, of that it's not just about the fight. It's about everything going into it, which makes the fight heightened. And then now everything on top with Victor, you're just emotionally just conflicted in every single way, and it's beautiful.
Which is why that ending is so powerful for me, is that when it all comes down to it, Ivan realizes what he's done.
Yeah.
And he decides to throw in the towel. It was the thing that Rocky could have never done in Rocky IV.
Yeah.
As he watched Apollo die, he never threw in the towel. So it's a really beautiful and kind of heartbreaking moment at the same time, but you realize that Ivan is actually human.
Yeah.
And that leads to this great moment as the fight ends, and Ivan is in the corner with his son, and he's like, no, it's okay. Like, what we've done at this point, it's okay. Like, it doesn't matter anymore. We fought so hard, and I'm so proud of you. And it's such a great moment because, again, you finally get to this place where it actually feels earned. Yeah. And the Drago story feels so earned. And it's interesting because we've talked a little bit about cinematic universes and people buying into this world now of elongated storytelling, if you will. And the Dragos in a way now, I'd be very curious to do a movie about them at this point.
See, people say that. And this is the part where I kind of disagree. Where there's a moment at the end where it's Victor and Ivan running next to each other, and it's like, it's not complete. Oh, we're buddies now, but it implies that. I think that's a little bit ham-fisted. I think that's a little bit too far. I think their relationship throughout the entire film is built up so much to be kind of, these are the terror. They have depth behind them, but these are the terror that are coming to, like, when you see Victor Drago, you're supposed to be intimidated on a level that, like, especially for Adonis, that he's never been before, that at the very end when it's like, oh, you know what? They're just a father-son who's ready for the next hijinks.
I don't know if it necessarily says that.
It's not that bad, but people are like, oh, I want to see their story past that. I'm like,
you know why I say that, though? Because I want to see what Ivan feels he's become. We haven't fully gotten there yet, and I think that there's something worth exploring still with the character. I don't necessarily think that it's going to be a massive change, but I think that there's enough that you could see where he and his son go, to the point that even if it was just one more movie, and it doesn't have to be a Creed movie, it could be in that universe, and it's just them together and trying to, now that everything is laid out as it is, now you aren't fighting to be, the fighters, like the best fighters of Russia. You're trying to be yourself now, and that's playing into exactly what this movie is about. Adonis, you're trying to fight out of that shadow, right? And then you finally put the shadow behind you. You could still do that with them, and I think that there's an interesting storyline for them to put behind them, that they were trying to do this to make people in their country like them, to make these people in the country who they were like, you have to like us, you have money, we don't want to be a disgrace anymore. What if you finally come to terms with the fact that you will never be that necessarily, and what that does to someone to finally drive them to be their own person? And I think that there's something there.
I get that. I feel like that has the exact same question along with Adonis. I think I'm very curious as to what a Creed 3 would be, because I think it's pretty certain they're going to make another one at this point.
Apparently, Michael B. Jordan wants to make 5 of them altogether. Like, not 5 more of them, but 5 altogether.
Hey, man, 5 Fantastic Beasts, 5 Creeds. Let's just keep going with this 5 train. That's
5 Rambos.
Rambo, like, if Stallone's going to bring this much to Rocky, I am pumped for whatever the last one is. But real quick, like, to finish my point, I think I'm just not interested in what kind of the Drago's reaction past what this movie is, because basically every question that we would have about them that happened before this has been answered in terms of kind of how they were raised, what the society was that they were in. And so we kind of already know, like, what their society is, of just, like, this very utilitarian of, like, you're a representation of us, and if you fail, you're nothing to us. So it's like, seeing what they would be outside of that, I'm a little interested in, but I have the same question for Adonis that is way more like, I feel like you could go way more directions with, of, you've proven to yourself, that you can defend the honor that you feel like you can defend, as well as living up to it.
Sure.
I just don't know if, like, the Dragos have the same amount of, like, kind of character depth that, Adonis would. I don't see the story there the way that I do see for
It's
Adonis.
all about how it's handled, because we all said the same thing about Creed. And that's why, I mean, look, it'll probably never happen, but it's a fun what if in the back of my head. That's kind of where I'm coming from, is that there's certainly a story I feel like that's there. It's the same thing. If I could do anything, to be completely honest, I would love a prequel movie about Mickey during the World War II eras as a prize fighter, because I think that you would have a very different look at what boxing was back then, and I think you'd have a very different feel, because Mickey is a much different character than Rocky, just like Adonis is a much different character than Rocky.
Yeah.
I think that there's something worth exploring there. I don't know. At one point they talked about it. I know that. So I think that in this day and age, as we're expanding things, it's only a matter of time. I think we're going to see more movies in this universe. I think it's going to be... it's all dependent on what characters people latch onto.
Well, I think it's that, but I also think that studios are learning to be a bit more cautious and a bit more appreciative of the franchises that they have, that if they take the wrong steps, because we see, with, the Universal Monster Universe with WB, like, if you don't treat your properties, if you don't treat, your franchises with kind of the reverence that you should, the audience realizes that, and it kind of goes down a direction that, a studio wouldn't want a franchise to go. And I think the reason Creed works is that Ryan Coogler threw so much of himself into what, Creed is and, like, what that story is. And there's so much emotionality behind that you're not going to find in Jurassic World. You're not going to find in The Mummy. That if someone could put it into the, the Mickey World War II movie, awesome. But it's just that Creed is such a special movie that is not a formula that you can, just tack onto other franchises. I
don't think you're wrong.
Yeah.
But I also think that
I would love to be proved wrong.
I think this is going to be a perfect segue into the second half of the show. So let's go ahead and go to break. But we will kind of get back to the cinematic universe thing. We do have a few things that we are going to talk about on the other side, where we get to dive into that exact notion of whether we think the studios have learned from their mistakes or not, and about taking their property seriously. So, guys, on the other side, Patrick and I will be talking a little bit about the new Snake Eyes news, 21 Jump Street spinoff, and a few more tidbits. So we look forward to seeing you guys on the other side.
And, Patrick, do you know what I'm pretty proud of right now?
That we're still talking?
Well, but the amount of times we both haven't said Patrick to confuse people.
That's why I go by PJ.
Perfect.
That's why I figured it out. All right, guys, we will see you on the other side of the break.
What's up, movie nerds? My name is Brandon Hanna, and I host a show called Film Physics. What is that, you ask? Well, it's the show where we hold filmmakers accountable for their blatant disregard for scientific accuracy. We ask the important questions of this generation, such as, could Jack have survived the Titanic? Or, is Star Wars hyperspace travel even possible? If this interests you, head on over to youtube.com/Brandon Hanna, and thank you for taking time out of your day for this moment of science.
And welcome back to the PJ Campbell Show. Once again, I am your host, Patrick PJ Campbell. With me, as always, is Patrick Hogue.
The side host, or the co-host, or the tangential host, or
the
adjacent
person that I have here because I couldn't find anyone else. And, you're
Just
a nice Canadian boy, so I figured, what the hell?
We do nothing but bring positivity.
I try my best on most days, which makes this first story kind of interesting because I don't know how much positivity I can bring to it.
Talk about a transition right
I
there.
know, but here's the thing. So there's these G.I. Joe movies, right? Have you seen these? Have you seen these movies?
I have seen the first one, and I could not muster the energy to see the second one.
Okay, so I have seen these movies. I have seen them both multiple times of my own willing time.
Do you hate yourself?
I don't know how much I...
Which is harsh. I shouldn't go
I shouldn't
that
say
far.
that far, but I mean...
Yeah.
I definitely... I'm the kind of person who really wants to continue to give things a chance, and I really want to
Benefit
like the
of the
thing.
doubt.
Yeah, right, exactly. So, the Hasbro universe is now a thing at Paramount, and this is exactly what we were just talking about.
Anything
this whole
with
idea.
universe at the end, I just roll my
Right.
eyes and then punch myself in the face.
So, with that comes, of course, is the first new, the first new film in the Transformers franchise, which is Bumblebee, which is actually opening in just a few weeks. And which is apparently now confirmed to be a reboot. It's this kind
Is
of
that
thing.
official? That's real?
That's what I am gathering from what I've been hearing over the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
It was in a THR article, I believe, or a Variety article in the past couple of days. And I had kind of heard that when it went back to reshoots, the idea was to scrap everything from that was basically Michael Bay. Yeah, because it was definitely at one point tied to it.
Do you know what I think the reason is?
Because they want to start over, and Bumblebee is the good way to do it because you can make a boy and his dog story, but with an alien.
Well, no, because you physically cannot have John Cena and Mark Wahlberg in the same universe because it's just like antimatter hitting antimatter, and just like everything would.
Or maybe it's
implode.
just because the Transformers movies are just that bad at this point.
Which I'm excited to talk about this new G.I. Joe movie in conjunction
Right,
with
which is
this-
exactly what I'm kind of leading into, is that part of this Hasbro universe obviously is the idea that the Transformers and the Joes are supposed to eventually meet up, and so now they're talking about
just
doing
a bunch of Transformers and Joes trying to get a drink.
They should have done that to begin with. I always will contend that Michael Bay was much more suited to make a G.I. Joe movie than he ever was a Transformers movie. And
Dude,
it's so
Bad
crazy
Boys, but as
I'm a little surprised that as it
Hold
was
on.
that we never got there.
Not a bad idea.
Right. So essentially what we're seeing now is that the Snake Eyes film is finally going into development.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about Snake Eyes. I love the idea of doing this character. Every time that they've talked about the script, it's kind of gotten my curiosity going, because they're very much saying it's supposed to be an Akira Kurosawa type film and like a Blind Swordsman film.
Yeah.
I love samurai movies.
Yeah.
There's just something about those. They speak to me. I own the Criterion 27 movies, Zatachi, the Blind Swordsman movies, like Lone Wolf and Cub, Seven Samurai.
As I look to your overly impressive Blu-ray collection, where I can't see it, but I do buy that you own all of these
It's right
classics.
there at the
of what-
corner.
Yep. Oh, yep, in the corner. Right
Yeah,
there.
I
Beautiful.
definitely love samurai films. And
Absolutely.
so, I mean, for a big blockbuster, that sounded like a very interesting angle, was trying to tackle it in that sort of way. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, you kind of have my attention.
Yeah.
And now the news is coming out that the director of Red and 2 of the 3 Allegiant, or 4, is that how many they made?
It was 3.
It was 3.
and
He
a
directed 2 of
fourth
the
to
3.
TV that did maybe possibly
Never
might not
happened, but Robert
Jeff
Schwenkt-
Daniels was in it at some point.
Yeah, so this gentleman's name is Robert Schwenkt.
Probably a nice guy.
Probably the nicest guy in Hollywood, I have to believe. But this seems like an absurd choice to me for the movie that they were touting versus the talent that they have now attached to it as a director. I like Red a lot. I really do. The first Red is
It's
actually
fun.
a very fun,
It's a fun
comic book movie.
It knows what it is
Sure.
and does not try to rise above what
But
it is.
boy, does this not land well with me. I was sitting here thinking about it, especially as we were kind of leading up to talking about this, and I was like, man, if you're going to do this, and I know that we're not like early 2000s Hollywood where we started importing every director that we could from other countries, but if you're going to make a movie that's based off of the idea that you want to make a samurai film, doesn't it make sense to pull someone like out of Japan or China or anywhere that's an Oriental director? Because to me, I really, really believe in like the inclusive nature of Hollywood, and I think we're finally getting to a place where that's really starting to come to the forefront. We've been talking about Creed and Ryan Coogler and Black Panther. So I'm sitting here going, man, this is like the chance for someone to come in here, maybe like Wilson Yip, the guy who did the Ip Man films with Donnie Yen.
Oh my
and like
God.
you could make this
Could you imagine?
great G.I. Joe film with Snake Eyes front and center, and you get the guy who did Red.
You know, the culturally diverse movie that stars Bruce Willis, John Malkovich, Helen Mirren, Morgan Freeman, and there was someone else.
I can't remember her name right off the top of my head. She's
Oh.
from Weeds.
And R.I.P.D.
Yes, and R.I.P.D.,
You know.
which he also directed and could have been Men in Black for the Supernatural, and it's not. It's so bad. This is where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
This is where my frustration lies, is that you want to be ambitious, you want to do this really cool thing, and I'm like, man, here's how you can do it. You're so close. And I want to give them the benefit of the doubt because Bumblebee actually looks really good.
Well, and this is the thing. And this is kind of my perspective on the whole situation, is that I'm somebody who's very interested in the filmmaking aspect of all of this. Of you can announce a project. Like, I am fully against the idea of a new Willy Wonka. But the second they said that the guy who did Paddington is going to do
Tim
it.
King, he's a nice guy.
Nice guy. And I also look at those films and I'm like, that tone associated with Willy Wonka, I'm not against.
Those movies are so
movies
perfect.
Are beautiful.
And I mean that. I legitimately mean that. Those movies are perfect.
And they're tonally in line with what I'm thinking. And it's like, they're, I'm tangentially really interested in Star Wars. Like Last Jedi is my favorite film. I have no interest.
You mean a Star Wars film? It's not your favorite film ever, right? Just so that we're clear for the people
Star
at
Wars
home.
film.
Okay.
So the semantics police don't come and get me.
Right.
Star Wars I very much appreciate more than I love. I have no.
It's okay. We're all wrong sometimes.
We all have flaws. Mine is that I have 2 left feet.
I believe it. I've seen you dance.
I'm a mutant. Jeez. Ouch, kind of close to the bone there. All right. But I have no interest in what a Boba Fett movie would be. But you tell me that James Mangold was involved in that. Someone who made a great Western with 310 Yuma. Someone who made possibly one of the best comic book movies that's very inspired by Westerns with Logan is going to do a Western-esque Star Wars movie with, a bounty hunter that's, informed by, like, his life. Like, it's not going to happen, but that was the first... the fact that that filmmaker was associated with that property is what got me interested. Looking at what Bumblebee is, in comparison to the Michael Bay Transformers, I saw the first 2 Transformers, don't give a flying F about what the rest of them are. You tell me Travis Knight. And it's funny because, like, that was always the one piece of news that kept everybody on board with Bumblebee. The second people heard that they were doing a Bumblebee spinoff, they were like, what?
Well, and again, also because it would be tied to Bay's films at that point. Because it was announced as a prequel. Remember that?
Yeah, but even just the idea of, like, what really is there to tell? And then, But the second they were like, it's Travis Knight, the guy who did Kuvo and the Two Strings, which is this fantastical Legend of Zelda-esque kind of like mystical fantasy about somebody trying to like weave their way through this mysterious world, associated with Bumblebee, this character who we don't really know much about. And then you get more pieces of, like, it's set in the 80s, you get Haley Steinfeld, John Cena, and you're like...
Oh, so you're making an Amblin film. That's kind of how I've looked at it.
But it was the director that set that initial kind of like emotional tone that's like, I can get behind this. Same thing with like a James Mangold with Logan. Same thing with Rian Johnson doing Star Wars of like, I was excited for Force Awakens. The second I heard Rian Johnson was doing the next episode, I felt so assured knowing that this is a guy who has a complete understanding of like a sci-fi world tone, who knows how to like build a mythology, especially with Looper, knows how to build a mythology.
Well, I would say even look at Brick.
Look at Brick. Well, like this is a guy who understands characters interacting with the world and those two having to be like cohabitated.
Sure.
And so put him with Star Wars brilliantly. You give me the guy who made Red doing, a samurai movie, I
don't see it.
I don't see it either. And it's like, again, you announce Creed, the spinoff of Rocky. You get someone like Ryan Coogler, who made Fruitvale Station, who proved like this is a guy who knows how to do somebody struggling in an environment and trying to figure out who they are inside that environment, doing a movie within the Rocky franchise.
And you know what's funny is that I was kind of like, why are we pulling another white guy from America? But I forget he's actually a German filmmaker, so he is literally the people I was talking about from pulling from other countries. Yeah. But at the same time, he's just
Paul
not
Verhoeven
this
in
guy.
here.
Like he's not the one that I would use. If you really need to go down the white male director route, if we're going to do this, Simon West, who did The Expendables 2 and Con Air, I could see him doing a cool like action film. It would still not be the movie I want.
But at least it has a uniqueness to it that's not going to make it feel like, G.I. Joe 2.
Sure.
Or G.I. Joe 1.
Well, and here's the funny thing about the G.I. Joe franchise overall is that there is parts that work really well in those movies.
Yeah.
And there's parts that just don't, and that's because it feels like they were trying to do so much. And then the weird thing with the second one is it's kind of just a reboot of the franchise because they didn't really want to have Channing Tatum again because Channing Tatum didn't really want to be involved at that point.
Well, and it's like when they first started shooting that, Channing Tatum wasn't as big as like then 21 Jump Street came out and it's like, oh wait, everyone loves Channing Tatum at this point.
Sure.
We can like figure out a way to make it cool that we're killing him off, and like The Rock's huge, and like Bruce Willis is in it.
Because that second movie, I saw it almost a year before it came out. The week or two before it got pushed back, I was at a test screening for it. And they pushed it back like not that long after, and
Yeah.
it's funny because it didn't really change.
Yeah.
Which is it was one of the few times where I was like, oh my god, I was like, why are they pushing it back 9 months? And it came out, and it was almost the exact same movie. They had just
Like,
post-converted
why
it.
did they push it back 9 months?
But then, so of all things, and I would know this because I own it, there's a director's cut of that movie that was a Best Buy exclusive on Blu-ray.
Who directed the second one?
John Chu, I believe.
And he did the Justin Bieber
Yeah.
concert, which I saw in theaters.
And he actually did Crazy Rich Asians earlier this year, and he's directing the second and the third. So, obviously.
Good for him.
But it was funny because I actually talked to him after it was over because it kind of leaves in a
At
place.
the screening?
Yeah, and he had all these ideas for what he wanted to do with the third movie.
I
and
remember
that
there
didn't
being a
happen.
buzz behind the second one for a little bit of like people being like, this guy's got a vision going into it.
And it's clearly compromised when you watch it. I think the director's cut of the movie is a better version, but the problem is it wasn't the movie that was in theaters, and I understand the argument of people who are like, it's director's cuts don't matter because it's not the version that was in theaters. Yes, however, when a movie is taken away from the filmmaker, I'm always interested in their version eventually if we get it.
But it's so hard to like discern like when there are issues like what's a studio, what's a director, because movies are really hard to make.
They're impossible.
And
to
it's
make.
like, like Peter Jackson has gone on record to say like Lord of the Rings is better because of Warner Brothers influence, and like Sam Raimi is like Sony really helped out with those first 2 Spider-Men.
It's funny you bring up the Peter Jackson thing because I think he'd push back a lot on that when it comes to the Hobbit films.
Well, and like that's just again talking about bastard children. That's something that was a Guillermo del Toro vision retrofitted to like become a Peter Jackson vision, which I feel like that was just like a bad situation on top of a bad situation. But
I still can't believe that they made 3 of those, and I was in Hall H the day that they announced that it was going to be 3 films instead of 2.
Yeah,
and they showed the footage, and we were all sitting there, and Jackson kind of totes out. He goes, and what would you guys think if it was 3 films? And there was kind of quiet.
he has a notepad ready to like have a yes or no check mark, and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, we'll do it."
It was kind of weird. Like you could tell people were like, yes, but wait, did you just say it was going to be 3 movies now? And they had showed this sizzle reel, and it was kind of cool, but it was so funny because there was footage in that movie, or in that sizzle reel, that wasn't in any of them until the 3rd movie because it had been split apart so much at that point. And it was just such a weird situation because you could tell he was like uncomfortable with it.
Well, and that's the thing. They literally made it a 3rd movie so he could have enough time to just figure out what that last battle is. But it feels like that.
It's funny because that 3rd movie is not a movie. I went to bat for Quantum of Solace earlier in the episode. I can't do that for the Battle of 5 Armies.
No.
Because it doesn't.
And I like Desolation of Smog.
I do too.
A lot.
I like it a lot too.
Yeah.
I think of the 3 Hobbit films, it's easily the best. But I also think that it's just so fascinating that
I think it's the best without having an ending at all.
Yeah, but it was just weird that they decided that was the route they wanted to go down with the 3rd one.
I think it was the only one they could know.
Because do you remember initially, and we were going so off topic again. We'll get back to it, but it was so weird because when they originally announced it, there was a talk about it potentially being 3 films at that time.
Yeah,
but it was only going to be 2 Hobbit films and a bridge film, and it was going to be a bridge film set in the years between the end of The Hobbit and the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring.
I didn't hear that. Interesting.
Yeah, and that was what they had originally talked about.
Wow.
And so there was. I think that's kind of what the Amazon series is going for, to be honest, is like these lost years of Middle Earth.
Are they doing the Silmarillion, or are they doing completely separate, just their own original?
I don't know what WB owns and what they don't.
I know the Silmarillion has been the one that's like nobody knows like what to do with in terms of how to adapt, or like
it also
is that a franchise maker? Or
it comes also down to the Jackson estate, or not the Jackson estate. The Tolkien estate has very much been against what they've done, and so now they're really hard on the rights, and I think that comes very much into play on the situation.
Yeah.
So I'd be very curious to see. That's why I was so surprised they even announced a series, because I wasn't sure what rights anyone had at this point, and it's still WB produced. I'm gonna guess that they've smoothed a lot of the bad blood between them and the family at this point, because I think the one person who was like the biggest holdout on everything.
Proprietor
yeah.
of like, hey, this is the franchise that we want to hold on.
Which I think is Christopher Tolkien. I
Sounds
believe he's no
yeah.
longer really in the picture as far as things go.
Well, and Amazon, especially with their shows, like with something like Marvelous Miss Maisel and stuff like that, definitely seems like it's willing to curate people who are passionate.
Well, that's what I felt with Jack Ryan.
Yeah, and it feels like you get the right person who's like, hey, let me go to the family. I care about Lord of the Rings. I care about this world. I have an idea. Let me pitch it to you and like let me express my passion. That's very not anti-studio, but it's very much like this is coming from a good place. And it's like if you trust us with this, I'd like to expand. This is just
I
all
think
hearsay
Netflix
knowing.
kind of does that too, as far as the films go, for better or worse. When you look
Netflix
at
is also
things like
oh,
Bright.
do you have an idea? Oh, we have money. Here, make it.
Yeah, I'm worried that will be Netflix's undoing.
It's
not too long.
It is an expanding bubble that right now they still have bullets in the chamber, like Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, and they had Marvel and everything in the chamber, but it's like at some point there is kind of a diminishing returns of like there's only so much. There's the SNL skit of like literally they just have an infinite loop of stuff that makes more stuff that just keeps going and going and going, and it's like where does it end?
Netflix's biggest problem right now is going to end up being the Disney streaming service and the WB streaming service coming out within months of each other.
Yeah, but I also feel like Disney is an expanding bubble that we're already seeing. Marvel is having cracks in it, and Star Wars is having cracks in it.
I don't know if I agree, because the cracks is not Marvel cracking under the pressure of Netflix.
No,
it was
no.
them.
Yeah,
it was them going, we want full control of the stuff that we're doing.
I think audiences and people are so aware at this point of like saturation, and are so aware of when a franchise or a studio or whatever is like taking over, that what Disney is really good at is taking over with making it seem like they're not taking over. And with this streaming service and kind of like, stuff like, not to get too dramatic, but like the firing of James Gunn, with like Netflix stuff being canceled, with Star Wars kind of being on the rocks, I feel like people are starting to realize the influence that Disney has and like what is their relationship with Disney with all these live action remakes. I feel like there's a point, and I don't think it's soon, but I do think Disney will get to a point where they do have to kind of very self-critically look at themselves in terms of public perception and be like, what is our next step forward? Because I don't think they can keep doing the same thing they're doing. And I'm very curious.
You say that,
yeah,
because I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, when I look at The Mandalorian and the talent that they've gotten involved with that already, shows me that they're still very interested in working with different visions and different people for everything.
They got Rian Johnson to do Last Jedi. That is insane.
I think when you look at Benny Elfman Weiss doing their own series over there,
if they still give Rian Johnson his trilogy, I'm like, all right, they care. They know that like good content circumvents, short-term success.
No, and it'll be very interesting because I don't think you're going to see the cracks so much in the Marvel stuff either. I think that
how they
happen,
react on the Guardians side will be very indicative of that.
Well, it's not just that. I think that sooner rather than later, we're going to see Daredevil in a Spider-Man film, and I think that was part of the reason that Kingpin ended up being into the Spider-Verse, was that it's a character that everyone at Sony...
Get into the pop culture kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's also one of the main villains of the Spider-Man PS4 game, which I'm playing through and is great.
But I think that what you're going to see is that Marvel very much wants to... There's a reason Feige's getting involved with the TV shows. He now on Disney streaming. The Loki series, the Falcon and Bucky series...
Yeah.
And the Vision and Scarlet Witch series are all being produced by Feige. He's directly involved with all of them, which is why all the talent is still involved in it, because he wants to be able to control things. There's always been a divide between Marvel TV.
Yeah. And this is a good way to cohabitate, like, let's start integrating movies into TV, and, we cancel all the stuff on Netflix.
And then do it our way.
Bring it back over.
And it'll be interesting because... I know there's been a lot of talk that they don't think there's a potential of bringing back Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio as the characters, and I understand where people are coming from. There was a writer from the Rolling Stone who was talking about it and he was saying, I really just don't see it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's really going to happen that way, which is fine and all interesting. But I would have said the same thing a couple of years ago when you look at the stuff that happened with Constantine and WB. Because Constantine went to NBC, was canceled after a season. The rights got a little weird. And what did they do? They did a one-off episode of Arrow where Constantine came back.
Yeah.
And then as time progressed, they brought Matt Ryan back in animated form on 2 separate occasions.
Yeah.
And then when the rights finally found a way to be untangled, they brought him back on Legends of Tomorrow. And now he's a full supporting cast member after being a guest star all of last season.
Well, and the thing is, and like to tie it back to the Snake Eyes kind of like initial thing, what Marvel is really kind of phenomenal, tough word, especially in terms of their films, is that a director has a vision. You fit into the universe, but you got a vision. I'm not interested in a Black Panther movie. You tell me Ryan Coogler's doing it, I'm interested. I'm not really interested in what, Guardians of the Galaxy is. You tell me the guy who made Slither is into it, and it still maintains whatever that kind of like vision and kind of perspective that director has, I'm interested. And so you want me to get interested in what your streaming service is. You want me to get interested in these TV shows. Tell me that you're going to have, Kevin Feige supervising, and then you're going to get somebody on the level of like a James Gunn visionary. You're going to tell me you're going to get someone on the level of a Ryan Coogler visionary that's going to start leading these shows. Marvel is great at like, broad spectrum, like kind of audience pleasing kind of merchandise and like kind of franchising whatever their properties are. But they're also very smart and self-aware in terms of, we're going to bring Taika Waititi in to like do what he does to reinvigorate, so that Thor, our franchise, doesn't get stale. And they have that balance between what is a franchise and what is an artistic vision. And they've almost distilled it down to like a scientific method in a way that is so precise that right now we are in such an interesting time right now between whatever Avengers 4 is, because the status quo is so up in the air that it has never been before, that I don't know where they go from here. And so I'm just so shocked that other like studios like Warner Brothers, which I think they are doing pretty well in terms of now with Aquaman, in terms of Shazam, in terms of Wonder Woman, letting the creatives add their touch.
Joker especially, for better or worse.
And like I am more interested in that because they've said this is not connected. So I'm like, cool. Let that vision. Todd Phillips, interesting choice. We'll see how it works out. But at least they are, here's a property. Express this property in the way that people want it to be expressed, but put your vision on it. I don't know. I feel like there's so much more intrigue behind that. There is so much more interest, and there's so much more possibilities and potential with letting the creatives like expand this property in the way that people want it to, rather than retrofitting it to like fit into the Zack Snyder universe.
Well, and I think that was always the biggest problem with the DC universe, was retrofitting everything to fit a certain quality of one filmmaker. I think that's why, at least in my opinion, the one thing that has made Star Wars and Marvel work is that under the guidance of one person with different people, they've created something that's a lot more fresh.
Yeah.
And I think that that's what I'm hoping for out of Hasbro. When you have the Transformers, when you have G.I. Joe, when you have all these Micronauts and all the Mask and all these big properties, you can
Who's
the
Kevin Feige?
Even Power Rangers, because Hasbro about Power Rangers.
Yeah.
The idea of a Power Rangers Transformers crossover is actually potentially really cool.
It's
when you
cool.
think of the idea of what could be.
And I even like the new Power Rangers.
I do too, but I mean, if they do a new movie, it's not going to be the same cast at this point.
But it's the thing of, before Marvel, no one cared who Iron Man was, but make me care about Iron Man.
Sure.
The way you would make me care about Power Rangers. Make me care about the G.I. Joe before. Because look at Justice League. I didn't really care about that Batman before he interacted, and I didn't give a crap who Aquaman or the Flash was.
That's the biggest problem with that movie, though. And I think that we can all agree was the fact that the thing that made the Avengers special, again, I don't think you can argue it at this point. I know that there's people who are going to be upset that we say this, but Marvel at least took their time. There was an Iron Man film, a Thor film, a Hulk film, and a Captain America film leading up to it. Yes, Hawkeye gets the short end of the stick in the film, but I think he's expanded on greatly once you add in what they do with him in Age of Ultron.
Well, the thing that Marvel has over every other studio is patience.
Right.
They have the ability to know that this will pay. Like, we're going to take not as much money on Avengers 2 than what we're going to get on Avengers 3, because we know when we get to Avengers 3, it's going to be worth it because we built up to it. I don't think that the Marvel formula is the only way to go about it, but
It's not.
But right now, it's the only proven way. And the fact that, like, and I appreciate DC trying to do something different, but it just feels so
The problem is
self-assured in a way.
Forced. Because
Forced
if
is
you
a good
had
way to put it,
if you had let Zack Snyder finish Justice League, I think at least then we could say it was a failed experiment. I don't want to say that, because I actually really like the director's cut of BVS, and I like Man of Steel. And I'm not the biggest fan, but I think that there's qualities of both and that are very good. I think Man of Steel is better than BVS, and I think BVS, with its faults, has some very good moments that actually make for a better film, especially in the director's cut. But I would say that at least we would know that it was a singular vision all the way through had Snyder gotten to see it to the end. And I think the problem is that he keeps going on, what is it, Vero, that app that he's always on, and he's posting pictures now and all these behind-the-scenes things, and it's great for the fans, but at the same time, it's such a friggin' tease. Like, he's kind of fucking with them at this point, because they're never going to see his cut of the movie, and that sucks, because as a fan, I would love nothing more than to believe that 20 years down the line, we may get the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League, not because I necessarily need it, but because WB's done it before with the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2. The problem is, though, at that point, why would you do it? I mean, Superman 2 is a much different thing. There's no cinematic universe behind it.
See, and it's, I said previously that I'm someone who supports filmmakers' visions. I'm somebody that supports, kind of this creative thrust. I'm somebody who's seen the director's cut of Batman v Superman, and I still think it's utter trash.
That's fine. I mean, that's the thing.
And, that's the thing.
I mean, we just lost 25% of our listenership, but that's fine.
And to each their own, like, what if I talk about baguettes? So those 25% like baguettes? Probably not.
I just hope that people understand it is all personal opinion, by the way.
Yeah,
I really want to make that abundantly clear. I never want anyone to change their opinion because I feel a certain way about a thing.
Not at all. And I think that's the thing, that the lesson that Hollywood needs to learn. Halloween.
So Halloween, is that the October version of Hollywood?
Yes. It is the
Halloween.
Even though it is December 6th while we record this, we're going to reference...
Don't put dates on things. What are you doing?
No, shoot. Aquaman was great. Totally saw it already.
Oh, God. Okay, well, about that, I will get to talk about that in the next episode.
Oh, boy, interesting.
So, but regardless.
I think that is the main lesson that Hollywood needs to learn, is that it's not one template that you can fix on every franchise. Yes, Marvel did it well, and I think people are trying to copy it, but they're not copying it exactly, which is failing. But even if they copied it to the T, like with the Dark Universe, with the with the DC Universe, with whatever other universes out there, there still needs to be that sense of inherent passion.
Sure.
And
I totally agree.
Cares. And,
and I think that that's what's so interesting. I mean, kind of talking about the 21 Jump Street spinoff, because when you look at what they're doing there, they are trying to, like, Phil Lord and Chris Miller are still involved. They're still producing it. And what they're doing now is, I guess it's Tiffany Haddish and Awkwafina that are going to be the stars of it. And they're kind of changing the formula a little bit, where I guess that Tiffany Haddish will be the older partner who's going to come in and pretend to be Awkwafina's mom or something along those lines, and they're still trying to infiltrate the school, but they're playing up that same. This whole thing with a cinematic universe kind of properly done, if it's done correctly. It's all about the execution, and those 21 Jump Street films are great. And comedy sequels are really, really hit and miss, so I don't want to get too excited. But when you put the right people in place...
Again, you say Lord and Miller, it gives me confidence, because proven track record, we know that...
Solo was great. that
we
hurt.
have
That
differing
hurt me
opinions
too.
about that
No,
one.
that I was just meaning that we didn't see their movie and how
Maybe
much
at
that
some
hurts.
point in a future episode I can pitch you my Nintendo Cinematic Universe. But it's
as long as it means that we get to go to Universal Studios after to actually
and
see
to go
that
to
come
the
to life once
Super
it's
Nintendo
done.
world
Yeah.
that's being built. And that's the thing with this whole like Snake Eyes, I'm genuinely excited for Bumblebee, which is a sentence I never thought I would say in my life. But that's because of it's a singular film because I love the talent that's involved.
Did you ever think you'd miss the days of singular vision filmmaking when it came to superhero movies? Because the cinematic universe was such an exciting concept at the beginning, but I kind of missed the Rocketeers and the Shadows and
There was
things
a
like
moment that I was like, oh man, why doesn't Christian Bale's Batman just like connect with a Superman? And looking at it now, I'm like, because Christian Bale's Batman just fit as much as I think Dark Knight Rises is not a great film. I think it fits very perfectly into its own thing, and to try to retrofit it into something else would not do it justice.
I think you're
I'm excited
totally
for,
right.
Yeah, I think I'm excited for Bumblebee for the sake of genuinely for this feeling that I haven't had for a long time that I'm actually kind of feeling with Aquaman a little bit of what is it by itself?
Mm-hmm.
Could it build to bigger things? Maybe. But is it a complete experience in and of itself? Whereas when I go see Captain Marvel, I'm really excited for, the story it's going to tell, but like, oh man, what's it going to tell me about Avengers 4? What's it going to tell me about, Black
And
Panther
yet,
2? And like,
Venom was still terrible. And that's kind of what I wanted to get at real quick too, is that the whole thing with Venom is so interesting to me because there's a lot of people who are like, man, Venom is just the best thing ever.
it's
And
made
I just
more than
don't-
Wonder Woman.
I don't get it. I really don't.
He looks cool.
He doesn't even look cool. I think he
looks cool. I'll give him that.
I just don't understand. Okay, I'm glad people like the movie. I really am. But I don't understand. Like, again, we were just talking about the kind of the missing the days of singular filmmaking. But the other thing about that is, when does that stop being the thing where we're like, yeah, but it's a singular vision, so it's obviously good? Because Venom is not. It's it's very messy. It's just not a good movie.
Well, and the problem is, it's like you and I are both kind of a bit too connected to what the film pundit world is, and we both know that's like, oh, but Sony also had like a Silver Sable movie and Black Cat movie like in production. It's like, or like in pre-production, and I think we're a bit too close to kind of like what the system is to know that like Sony is not at all interested in what a singular movie is. They don't want to make. They're not making Venom because they're like, oh man, Eddie Brock is such a character that we can totally build like such a franchise because he's got such a deep history and such a.
But that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, but
Sony would love nothing more.
No,
by the way,
Sony isn't trying to do that. They're trying to be like, hey, Venom's pretty cool. Imagine if he was like, fighting like another one of our villains. Or imagine if he was like,
Eddie, I'm a loser on my planet, just like you.
And that's the thing. It's just like if you genuinely cared, you get someone like Paul Verhoeven, who made RoboCop, who made like Starship Troopers, to do this deconstruction idea of like
that it's never gonna happen.
And that's the thing. Sony doesn't care about a singular vision about
No,
what a
do you
Venom
know what they
movie
do care
is.
about?
Money.
Well, besides money, and this thing is making
More
so
money?
much of it, is they would love nothing more than for the Marvel to be like, hey, so that Venom movie did all right. We would
Want to
love
bring him into the universe?
Yeah, and that's what they want more than anything. They don't believe in the Spider-Man universe, I don't think, so much as a Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man, by the way, so much as they really, really hope that it could be like MCU adjacent. And that's so frustrating to me because I don't want that Venom in this universe. I just don't. There's a Venom that could have been cool in this universe who could have potentially been a character who could have gone on to become one of the Guardians because that's an actual thing in the comics. I'd have been cool with that. But every wrong move was taken with that movie. It feels rushed. It just doesn't work in any real way for me. And it's so weird because I wanted to like it. I really did. It just was not good. And this is what I fear, that Sony is going to learn all the wrong lessons from this. And it's the thing that I really want Bumblebee to do well because I don't want Paramount to see, like, if Bumblebee's bad and then it makes the same money Venom is making, they're going to start learning the same fucking thing, and that scares me so badly. I just don't want that.
I'm at the point that, like,
I don't want bad movies making money so we get more bad movies.
But that's the thing. If the only way Venom 2, whatever that is, makes money is if it's good. I think people, like, got what they needed out of Venom, and if Sony takes the same approach and takes the same kind of, like, franchise approach that they do to, like, most of their stuff, and they make Venom 2 in the way that they would make what we'd expect to be a Venom 2, in my heart of hearts, I got to imagine it will not do as well as what Venom would do.
Probably not, but I mean, look.
And that they
weirder
would
things have happened.
But that's the thing. Marvel has set such a beautiful standard of, like, who gave a flying F who the Guardians of the Galaxy were, and now it's one of their staple franchises.
One that may or may not.
We'll see about the future of.
Yeah.
But it's the, proof is in the pudding. Same with Ant-Man. Of, like, Ant-Man, the first, I didn't love Ant-Man and the Wasp.
I like it. I don't love it. But I do like that we've gotten 2 of those movies.
But the first one took the time, took the effort to be like, nah, it's worth it. Like, let's talk
and then
about this
Civil
guy.
War happens.
And then Civil War happens, and he shows up, and I'm like, that was worth it. That was worth it. A film. And, like,
exactly.
I didn't love Doctor Strange. Him showing up in Infinity War, I'm like,
and Ragnarok. He's amazing.
He's great in Ragnarok. And, that's one of those moments of, oh, cool. This is what this universe can do. But Infinity War, when he has those, when I saw Infinity War with you, and, like, the one thing I said to you before going into that movie was, I just need one snarky scene between him and Tony Stark. And it's, like, 6 scenes of him and Tony Stark just being, like, snarky towards each other. And I'm like, this is everything I, like, was working towards, because I didn't love the movie, but I fell in love with him in his movie. And I don't care about Eddie Brock or Venom. He's, I got a disease. I got to, I'm just a guy from San Francisco. What can I do?
Oh, and let's not even get started about the fact that they were like, well, let's move him as far away from New York as possible. I know that storyline actually takes place in New York in the or in San Francisco in the comics, but man, it feels so shoehorned to be like, and this is why you won't see Peter Parker show up in the movie.
This is not Spider-Man. And just the weird thing that the Spider-Man trailer is supposed to come out this Saturday, not to date this episode, but the fact that it's like, what is Sony doing in conjunction with Marvel? And it's like, is this whole thing going to fall apart?
No,
man, we are on such a tangent as opposed to this Red Eye. Like
the Red Eye. Red Eye is a different movie that was directed by Wes Craven.
Great movie though, with Cillian Murphy.
Yeah,
Cillian Murphy.
Yeah, Cillian Murphy and
Jennifer Gardner.
Not Jennifer Garner.
Right.
Oh my God.
Regina George and
Mean Girls. Oh my God.
Oh my God. I am so blanking right now.
That was really terrible, but that's okay. It happens. And
Rachel McAdams.
Yes.
Oh my God. I will sleep well tonight. Okay.
But look, at the end of the day, I think we all can agree that a Snake Eyes movie could be cool in the right hands.
Yes.
I love the idea of eventually it crossing over with Transformers, which is what they would like.
Be pretty neat.
I just really want to see Snake Eyes riding Optimus Prime into battle, like as the 18-wheeler version, and you see like a glint coming off of the sun, and like pans up, and you see Snake Eyes holding his sword, just ready for battle.
You give me a good Bumblebee movie with Transformers and a good Snake Eyes movie, then
it's all about.
I'm ready to see that. Yeah.
But they need to find the right person to really control it, and that's kind of where I'm at right now.
The director of Red, Bruce Willis, is Snake Eyes.
Yeah, but he was already supposed to be, the original Joe.
But now he's Snake Eyes.
God, could you imagine? All right, guys. So we are going to take one last break. On the other side of this break, we are going to talk to Patrick about his new short film, and it is going to be a lot of fun. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. See you on the other side.
Rest well for 5 minutes.
We're the Wild Press Podcast. We talk movies, occasionally video games, not really so much. Movies, like all art, are subjective. You're not always going to agree with someone on what they saw in a movie and then agree with what you saw in a movie. We want to make sure that everyone knows that that's okay.
By supporting our Patreon, you can get exclusive behind-the-scenes looks at some of our recordings.
Nobody's hard.
If you can't donate, that's perfectly fine. You can always help us out with likes, shares, and subscriptions.
You still have access to everything we make. Everything will be on our SoundCloud and YouTube at a later date. Because better late than never, right? And just like us, we're professionally unprofessional.
Welcome back to the PJ Campbell Show. Once again, I am your host, Patrick Campbell, or known as PJ Campbell. With me is Patrick Hogue, my co-host of the show. And
Not confusing at all?
Not confusing at all, and it won't be because I will continue to go by PJ for the rest of my known life. So that's fine, but I wanted to talk to you today. You're working on a short film. It's called So.
Yes.
And it's a little horror film, and I'm pretty excited because I love horror films, as you know. I'm a big fan of the genre overall.
Okay.
And so I just kind of want to talk to you a little bit. What is So, and what inspired you to do this?
So, and I say that more as the SO version of it. My film is titled So, SEW.
As in, like, you're sewing something.
Yeah. You just
great.
Wanna
I'm glad that we have that
fix a pair of pants. You got to sew them up. I moved out to Los Angeles after graduating film school. I have been inspired to make films my whole life. That is up until since high school. Filmmaking is something I have a lot of passion in. I made a couple films in school, and now I'm in the real world. And right now, I have a drive to make something. I have a drive to make a film. And horror is something, especially that has been a very close part of me that I just feel like is a genre that has not been served in a way that I would love to see it represented. And I say that in a very pretentious way. That being said, there's an aspect to horror that I would love to encapsulate in this film. So, what was the initial question? I feel like I'm deviating.
Well, no, it was, what is this and where is it kind of coming from? Like, I guess for me, when I look at horror films, there's so many different levels to horror. Either you're doing like the slasher film, or you're doing like the existential horror film. You're doing the sci-fi horror, the body horror.
Yeah.
I mean, so what are you looking at as your inspiration? Are you looking at the John Carpenters of the world, or are you looking more at like the Wes Cravens? Where does this come from for you?
I think for me, there's always been an aspect to horror, two aspects especially, that have been very underserved in terms of horror. The main kind of creative inspiration that comes from it is a manga artist by the name of Junji Ito. This J-horror, like very...
So you're a big fan of J-horror?
Very, very big fan.
Okay.
Very grunge-esque, very Ring-oo-esque, as opposed to Ring-esque.
Grudge or grunge? It's the Grudge.
Grudge. Pardon.
Did you see Grudge versus Ring You, by the way?
No. Is that a thing?
That's an actual thing that came out, I believe, a year or two ago.
Well, I have a plan for tonight now.
Yeah,
now that I haven't seen that. But it's
you're welcome.
And to put it in a very simple term, it's this J-horror that I have a lot of interest in. It's this sense of just kind of atmospheric horror that I am always a big fan of. But for me, it's also, I have always been disappointed by horror shorts, especially for me, and like horror isn't the only thing I want to make one day, but especially as like a front foot forward that I want to do right now in terms of a short I'm making. There is such a missed opportunity with so many like horror shorts that I see right now in terms of emotion and in terms of character development and in terms of depth, that the amount of horror shorts I've seen that's just, we're going to set up a creepy environment, and then Joe Schmo walks in and turns out there's a ghost in the house or a demon in the house, or it turns out a crazy person, and it's really stylized and it's really well done and it's super...
Can I ask?
Yeah.
Are you taking aim at The Conjuring currently and James Wan and or his Insidious films even?
No, because
okay.
I feel like...
I was just curious because I feel like there's a lot of people who have those problems with his films.
Well, with James Wan, I don't think he pretends to be J-horror the way that I think a lot of directors nowadays do. I think he and... I forget who said it, but I think there was someone who put the Conjuring films this way in terms of they're the Marvel films in terms of horror movies.
Hi, that was me. That was a conversation we had.
Yes, Mr. PJ Campbell, respected film critic in the community. He makes a very entertaining horror film.
Yeah.
You kind of know what to expect, but you enjoy expecting it. Whereas, I don't know, there's Eli Roth, I appreciate on a very, 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 very low level, but I feel like he's somebody that tries to do that level of atmospheric kind of J-horror in a way that's very Americanized I don't appreciate.
I think you're absolutely right.
Whereas,
I also think he leans heavily on Grindhouse, and it doesn't necessarily mix.
Yeah.
At least in my opinion, I'm not a huge fan of Hostel.
Yeah.
And when it came to the things he was doing outside of that, I thought Death Wish was... I mean, I know that that wasn't a horror film.
Yeah.
But when it came to Death Wish, it felt very bad taste for the time.
It felt very surface level in terms of like trying to like commit to something that it really didn't have the depth to commit to, and like.
But it also didn't. It had the wrong voice, and I think that the thing that I really like a lot about J horror, and at least the way that I've always seen it, is it feels like J horror comes from a place where it's not necessarily that it has a voice about social issues, which Death Wish should have, if we're talking about Eli Roth, but it definitely has something to say about a lot of the time culture and family.
Yes.
That's something that's always kind of drawn me to it, and I think it's the thing that when I look at the Grudge reboot, the one that we did here in America
with Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Yeah, Sarah Michelle Gellar, and produced by Sam Raimi of all people. Didn't really capture that for me.
And it's I name dropped Junji Ito, who's this manga artist who he's very, what he specializes in is abstract constructs. One of his most seminal works is this this kind of series called Uzumaki. It's this whole volume of all of his works that is about this town that is cursed by the idea of a spiral.
Okay.
That's a weird sentence in and of itself. This town that's cursed by a spiral. And he has a lot of these stories that are just kind of, it's a normal story that's just has this one element that's just twisted, and it takes reality and it twists it in a way that makes you weirded and concerned.
It kind of heightens how you're feeling.
Heightens, and I think that's a good way of putting it. He's really good at having abstract constructs and explaining it in a way that makes sense. And I love that about J horror and about, especially Japanese horror, that intrigues me, that you'll just have a normal environment, but maybe somebody, their hand is just not acting the way it should. And that's a weird sentence to say, but like, there's something unnerving about that. It's the uncanny valley aspect of horror that just like intrigues me.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I would say that if going back to Sam Raimi, he very much made that abundantly clear with the Evil Dead movies, because there's not a greater scene when it comes to kind of 80s shock horror as Evil Dead 2, when Ash's hand goes bad and he's actually fighting it in the kitchen, first with himself before he cuts it off, and then the idea of his hand actually becoming the bad hand that's actually fighting him. And there's something kind of cool about that, and I love that idea that you want to tackle something like that. So is that, obviously not that exactly.
Well, and it's funny because it's like, for me, the pitch I would do is that mainly it's a drama about a couple dealing with the grief of a lost child. Like, that's kind of the pitch, but it's done through the lens of a horror film, and it's done through the lens of what if the horror took advantage of that grief.
And I love that, because I think that, again, is kind of the thing that I love about J-horror altogether, was that idea of a lot of the time when you move into the house, the spirit that is already there is playing on the people and the things happening to them and where they kind of are in their lives. And so
takes advantage of those kind of personal quirks that the people have.
Right. Yeah. And so you aim to do this, obviously you're saying it's a couple, so is it going to be like an ensemble cast? Is it really kind of pulled down to just this two central people?
Not even two people. It's mainly just one aspect of the couple reflecting on his relationship. It's the husband of a couple reacting on the relationship with his wife, reacting on the relationship of fatherhood in terms of who he sees himself as. If you've ever seen The Babadook,
great movie,
which is an Australian film about a mother dealing with grief with her son, and this force that is a monster that is very much the personification of her own personal demons. It's very much in the same way, but taken a lot more literally in this film, of just like the horror that happens in So is very much a direct reflect of the main character's unwillingness to change as a character.
And it's interesting because that kind of reminds me a little bit of Lights Out, David F. Sandberg's film from a few years ago, because when it started, it was actually obviously a horror short. Most people know that James Wan saw it and decided that he wanted.
Hey, this guy should make a movie.
Direct a movie, and now he's directing Shazam, which I think is awesome.
Yeah,
but
neat.
Lights Out very much deals with the idea of what someone with depression is going through and how it manifests itself into a creature and what that does to someone, especially because, like you said, she really just never changes, and she kind of lives with that horror her whole life. And what does that do to you? What does that do to your family? What does that create amongst people? And it's a very interesting concept. So I love that idea. And so to see that kind of tackled head on is really cool. So do you see this as a potential for a future feature film?
Not with this story especially, but like tonally, in terms of there's a feature I'm working on that I won't divulge much about, but just I love the idea of a character with baggage that has to go through something impossible for anyone else, but for this character especially, going through this impossible task helps them deal with this personal demon, like this personal impossible task they have to deal with. Like, I love there being like a real world allegory in terms of a monster, in terms of a demon, in terms of a crazy
whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever it is that is a representation of the thing they got to get over. That's a very like simple way of putting it, but I think along with the J horror atmosphere, in terms of just a normal environment that's askewed enough to be tonally disturbing, not scary, but just unnerving. Like, I feel like there's an aspect that's been very unserved in American Hollywood nowadays, in American film, as I say very pretentiously. I don't know. For me, it's a horror movie that I would love to see, that draws very much from the visceral part of the shadows you see in the night, along with the emotional baggage that you would get from something like The Babadook, something that you would get from the horror being a representation of whatever the character is going through.
I love that. I think that's so cool. And I don't mean that just because we're podcasting together. I legitimately mean that.
Then we know each other.
Right. It's more that the thing about horror is that I think that all good horror has something to say. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like my slasher films.
Heck yeah.
Halloween, though, to me, even the original, kind of has something to say about, what is the essence of evil? What if there is someone out there who is literally preying on people just because it's the nature of that thing?
Yeah.
And what does that do to someone? And I think that Halloween, the new one, for better or worse, tries to tackle what would become of that person. And I think that there's a very literal sense of the personification of evil in that I think that is very, very cool. But I think, again, going back to like Lights Out, or even when you look at things like Insidious, because Insidious definitely has some sort of background of the idea of the demon in that was kind of always in Patrick Wilson's life.
Yeah.
And he didn't remember that, and how that kind of follows him and haunts him forever. And I like that. I think that's really cool. And I think that's why I've always liked Ringu, because I actually read the original mangas of that long before I saw the Gore Verbinski film.
Yeah.
And before I even realized that there was actually like a set of films in Japan from them. Because for a long time, I mean, when it came to Japanese cinema, if I'm being honest, a lot of the time the Hong Kong movies I was watching were Jackie Chan movies.
How dare you?
I love martial arts
How
films.
dare you watch films by quality actor / stuntman / director?
But there is something about horror from overseas that I am very, very curious about. So I love the idea of trying to bring that here. The Wailing, as of recently, is another one that I very much enjoy. And I would love to see what you can do with this. So when are you hoping to bring this to life?
Haha, good question. Right now, I just finished the latest draft of the script.
Excellent.
I am in the which I am very confident is very close to the shooting script. I have most of the cast casted. I'm planning on shooting it in February of 2019, editing it very soon afterwards, coloring it, sound work done within that same time frame, and having an official release being in March, going through a festival circuit, but also having kind of a distribution within that time frame of March of 2019 for So, a film by Patrick Hogue, to be released to the world.
I'm really, really excited for it. And once it's finished, I would like, I mean, obviously you're going to be here with me week to week, but
You'll have me back.
I would like to have you back to talk about the finished product and how the shoot goes, because I am really, really excited for it. I just really hope that this comes together the way you really want it to, because, again,
So do
I think that you're very passionate about it. I think that it shows that you really have paid attention to exactly what you want it to be, and you clearly really want to kind of make an impact on horror, even in a little bit of a way that is your way. And I like that it's kind of a love letter to J-pop horror and what that means. So I'm really, really excited.
Hey, man, if I can do all of that, so am I.
Hey. So, because,
So,
wow, that was...
Talk about a transition.
No, I really am looking forward to it, though, and thank you so much for talking a little bit about it, because I know it's still, like you said, kind of the final stages of going into production, but...
As a budding filmmaker who is still learning his craft and still learning how to do just any of this, and to be able to, like, have somebody to just talk about it and just kind of emotionally express how I feel and be passionate about it, no, this is, a great place to be able to express that passion. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I have to let you plug a little bit. Is there any other short films that any of the listeners can go and find?
Well, if you check out my Vimeo page, if you go to Vimeo and type in Patrick Hogue, that's Hogue.
It's Canadian, guys. I don't understand
it's
it either.
French. It's weird. Turns out I found out today there's a Western called The Ballad of Cable Hogue.
Oh, wow.
Today, which blew my mind. But don't type that in. Type in Patrick Hogue on Vimeo. You should come across my channel, which has all my short films, has everything I've worked on in terms of me having kind of a director / producer kind of credit on. As opposed to that, I have a YouTube channel that if you can find, I'm not going to give you the link to, you'll find some very embarrassing middle school / high school short films that very much give an idea
happens.
as how socially awkward I am.
As opposed to how you are now.
Huh?
Yeah, well, I mean...
What? I thought
You've gotten better.
I thought we were friends.
We're definitely friends. So, guys, I have to say thank you so much for hanging out with us for the last about 2 hours as we just talk about all things geeky and nerdy and movies. I know that we set up top originally we weren't going to just talk about movies, and this episode kind of went straight only into movies.
Oops.
But I think it ended up being a really healthy conversation about all things kind of cinematic universe and more, to be honest.
I think for an inaugural episode, it very much set the tone for what this could be.
Look, it's a pilot episode, and we all know that the pilot episode is always working out the kinks of everything. There's very few pilot episodes that'll ever knock it out of the park first thing. You're not normally friends in Spin City or the West Wing. That very rarely happens, where out the gate you're just like, damn, that was good.
But I'm the Michael J. Fox of this experience, right?
You're more like the Christopher Lloyd.
I'm fine with that. I'll take it.
Because I want to be the Michael J. Fox.
That's fine.
I mean,
I'll be
it's Michael J. Fox.
Marty.
Yeah. Have you seen, real quick, before we wrap up, the Spin City episode where Christopher Lloyd's on it? Yeah, Back to the Future Part 4, Judgment Day.
Back to the Future is my favorite movie.
It's my favorite movie, too, as you know.
If I haven't ingested every piece of possible tangential content to that, you're crazy.
Including the animated series.
Correct.
Great. All right, guys. So with that, you guys can find me on Twitter at PJ_Campbell or Facebook at Patrick Campbell _PJ. You can find my writing over at SoCalThrills.com, as well as the Movie Trivia Schmodown website, where I do write and do some interviews with some of the competitors over there. And of course, that means please go check out the Movie Trivia Schmodown. It's something that I have been very happy to be even tangentially involved in over the last 2 years. It's really been the best experience. I've made the best group of friends that I could possibly have gotten. That includes Patrick. That's actually where we met, was through the Schmodown, and it's really, really special to me. So please continue to support the Movie Trivia Schmodown over at Collider. And Patrick, where can everyone find you online?
Well, first off, that day was the best/worst day of my life.
I know. I'm sorry that you met me too.
Hey, I'm sorry, but also super grateful. You can find me on Twitter.
Twitter?
Twitter.
Twitter?
It's a new social media app
Excellent.
that I'm inventing.
Okay.
No, you can find me at Twitter at Hogue.filmmaker. Very on the nose, I understand. And especially at Instagram, which I'm trying, to get more followers on. So, go to that one at Pat the Canadian. All one word, all lowercase. And like I said, my Vimeo, just type in my name, Patrick Hogue, Hogue. Not that difficult. Should be pretty easy. Takes 4 seconds. What are you doing else in your day? Just look it up.
They're listening to us, apparently.
All right. No, so you are doing good things with your day.
I like to think so, at least. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the first episode, and I very much look forward to the continuing adventures of this podcast as we move forward. Guys, we will see you later this month as we talk probably about Christmas movies and kind of a year wrap-up. Sounds about right for what we're doing. I haven't figured it out yet. We're always going to be just doing what we decide to do. But
Jingle bells.
Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Have a great day.
Bye.
Please leave this office.
Do we get any sort of souvenir?
Get out of my office!
I'll be back. I gotta pay.
Throw me a frickin' bone here. I'm the boss. Need the info.
Shut the fuck up, Donnie.
Heavy is the head that eats the crayons. I'm gonna take a nap. See you in 10 hours.
Dude, I almost had you. You almost had me. You never had me.
I like your style, dude.
End of line.